Today's title will be Getting into Good Trouble. Emphasis on the good. Okay. Let's do a little exegesis here about what this passage is trying to convey. All right, the first thing we notice here is that this is what we call a nature miracle, a nature miracle. There are different kinds of miracles in the ministry of Jesus. We have the healing miracles, the feeding miracles, the raising from the dead miracles, and the nature miracles. This is a nature miracle. Why? Because Jesus has control over the elements of this world. He has control over the sea. Now, once again, when we look at these Gospels, we have to remember that the Gospels are the fulfillment of everything that took place in the Old Testament. And so where do you find God having control over the elements? Right at the beginning, in the creation story, when God tames the raging waters and separates the land and the sea. So once again, what we have here is a theophany where Jesus is revealing himself to be God, and he is in control of the world. Famous song was developed from this. Who knows what it was? I got the whole world in my hands. Do you know that one? All right, let me hear it. We're better than the Mormon Tabernacle here. Okay, that's where this song develops from. And then we have a theme that's running through here, is the theme of discipleship. And the disciple is the one who has to follow Jesus and keep their eyes on Jesus to fulfill their mission. And every one of us as a disciple has a mission to fulfill, albeit sometimes the mission that Jesus calls us to might seem impossible, it might seem dangerous, and we're saying to ourselves, how am I ever going to fulfill this when it looks like the whole world is against me? So you have Peter here saying to Jesus, let me walk on the water. Disciple, somebody has to literally sometimes try to walk on the water. Sounds impossible, but when Jesus calls, we have to go to Jesus and do what he tells us to do. And then all of a sudden, the disciple here, Peter, takes his eyes off Jesus and says, wait a minute, this is impossible. I'm walking on water. Jackie Gleason, okay, honeymooners. Norton, all right. So he takes his eyes off Jesus, and all of a sudden he begins to sink. And that's what can happen to a lot of us. We say, wait a minute, this is impossible. I can't do this. I'm sinking. I'm up to my neck. I'm going to drown. And then Jesus reaches in and he pulls Peter out of the water and he saves him. And the key here is what? You have to have faith. He says, Peter, you faltered because you had little faith, O ye of little faith. So the disciple is the one who has to do what Jesus says to do. Keep your eye on Jesus. Have faith in Jesus. And if it is what Jesus wants us to do, he will make sure that even in the most difficult of situations, that we are going to succeed and that he is going to rescue us in time of danger. Because the world is a nasty place, a brutal place, just like the ocean, okay? Ocean is very, very dangerous. We need God to put it in its place and keep it under control. Okay. Let me tell you some stories about people who got into good trouble. I'm telling you, as Christians, you are called to get in good trouble, right? All right. First story is about a man named Mr. Procacci. How many know of Mr. Procacci? Better known as Mr. P. If you live in the vineyards and you go to the clubhouse, there is Mr. P's. And Mr. Procacci came from a place called Camden, New Jersey. And he came from a big family. And his father had a rule. The rule was you have to be in by 10 o'clock at night. And if you're not in, the door is going to be locked and you can't come in. Well, one night, Mr. P came late. and he was knocking on the door. Hey, Pop, let me in. Past 10 o'clock. You stay out tonight. Holy cow, you know. Next morning, Mr. P is waiting to get into the house. And his father finally opens the door. And he says to him, Michael, where were you last night? And he said, Pop, I was selling tomatoes. He said, where were you selling tomatoes? Well, if anybody comes from South Jersey, you know that we have the greatest tomatoes in the whole world. They are fantastic. A little oil, black pepper, and some mozzarella sliced in, and you think you died and went to heaven. All right? And that's why Campbell's Soup ended up in Camden, New Jersey. They would buy the tomatoes, and it's right on the Delaware River. And barges would come over to the South Jersey side from Philadelphia. And there were places called Mount Royal and places called Polesboro and Swedesboro, and all these small towns that had little slips for the boats to come in and then to bring the tomatoes over to Philadelphia. And they would sell them, especially in the restaurants. They were called ugly tomatoes, because if you see one of them in person, if you can meet a tomato in person, my father said I brought home a few in my life too. Ugly tomatoes. They're just delicious, but you know they don't look nice. So anyway, Mr. P got on one of the boats and bought a couple of boxes of tomatoes, and then he went to sell them over in Philly to the restaurants. So he gets back late, and that's why past 10 o'clock. So his father said to him, Michael, where were you? Pop, I was selling tomatoes in Philadelphia, and here's the money. The family needed the money. And he gave his father every cent he made. You know what his father said to him? Michael, you're a good boy. He got in good trouble. What beautiful words to hear, Michael, you are a good boy. I hope somebody says that to me someday, all right? Okay, good trouble. He did the good thing for his family, and it wasn't easy. Had to stay out all night. All right, second case of getting into good trouble. Many of you here have heard about St. Matthew's House. That's our wonderful organization that takes care of the homeless, the hungry, and those who are hooked on drugs and alcohol. Now, there was a CEO at the time named Van Ellison. Van's a fantastic human being, a friend of mine. And back in 2010, St. Matthew's House only had programs for the homeless. We have a homeless shelter, and then we have a feeding program for the poor and the hungry. But Van noticed something, that many of the people that were coming to the shelter, and even those coming to be fed, well, they were kind of on a cycle. They kept coming back, and part of the problem he found out was that they were hooked on drugs and alcohol. And so he said, what are we going to do about this? This is an unending cycle over here of these people, sleeping on the streets, sometimes committing crimes, and then we have them over here at the shelter, and we're not really doing anything to help them, aside from giving them food and a place to sleep for a month. So he decided that he was going to begin a drug and alcohol program. He didn't get permission from the board. He had been talking about it, but there was no conclusion that came from it. And so he did it on his own. He went out and he bought an old firehouse on 41 and began to invite in the addicts and the alcoholics. Now that, of course, causes some consternation. You're a CEO, you're responsible to the board. So there was some displeasure, let's put it that way, until people began to see how important it was what he had done. And so, there was some time of turmoil, there was some tension. Could have lost his job. How dare you go buy a place without our permission? But he did the right thing, and he got into good trouble. And the place is thriving today, thriving, and helping so many people, men and women, get over their addictions. And it's a real plus for our community here in Naples. And got in good trouble, and good things came out of it. Kept his eyes on Jesus. He told me, kept my eyes on Jesus. Jesus guided me. And that's why St. Matthew's House is so successful today. It's called Justin's Place. That's our place for men, Jill's place for women, for rehabilitation. All right. Last story. I've talked in past weeks about the movie, The Sound of Freedom. Talked about it. You saw the movie. Many of you saw the movie about child sex trafficking. Well, a real live agent, Tim Ballard, is the one that is responsible for the rescuing of children from sex traffickers. And this took place in Colombia. And Tim, as I have said, was an agent for Homeland Security. And he was so concerned about these children and what was going on, stolen from their parents, being used by perverted people for their own pleasure, that he became heavily involved in their rescue. And his superior at Homeland Security said to him, "It's not our job. That's not what we do." And he said to him, "But God told me to do it." Superior said, "Sorry, that's not our job." Now, Ballard had, I think, 5 or 6 kids on his own. And he took a 10-month unpaid leave from Homeland Security to go and rescue the children. That's trouble. That's trouble for your job. It's also trouble for your family who you're leaving behind to go and rescue children who are involved with sex traders. And yet he did it. And because of him, children were rescued. And because of him, the consciousness of America has come alive to the problem with sex trafficking. And Ballard is now back with Homeland Security. And as I said, he is responsible for the character played by Jim Caviezel in the movie. He got into good trouble. So what I'm telling you today as a Christian, sometimes you have to get into good trouble. The waters are dangerous, no doubt about it. But if you keep your eyes on Jesus, and when things get tough, you, like Peter, say, "Lord, help me," you can be sure Jesus is going to reach out his hand and rescue you. And when he rescues you, you're going to see that the good trouble you got in may be a cause for you entering into heaven. God love you.